Good afternoon. Welcome to the session on evaluating large-scale anti-poverty programs in developing countries. My name is Armando Barrientos. I work at the Brooks World Poverty Institute, which is in the School of Environment, Education, and Development. And of course, poverty is what we do. So I'm going to take the opportunity to tell you a bit about what the kind of work that we do. We have a session of 50 minutes. I hope to give a short presentation around 30 minutes, 35 minutes at the most, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions immediately after that. I got to ask you whether you have any objections to being filmed, because there is a film here. I noticed that there is no one around here, so you have taken your own steps to remain away from the NSA, I guess. Okay, right, so that's all right. Now, why is it that we're kind of interested in this topic? Over the last 15 years or so, across developing countries, many governments have taken steps to address poverty, and they have introduced programs that provide transfers to families in poverty, transfers in cash or in kind or a combination of both. They are very large scale, especially in the larger countries, and of course we're interested to see whether they work or not. That is the kind of objective of it, and therefore we need to kind of evaluate them, right? Let me give you a few examples of very large programs across the world. Perhaps the largest one is, as you would expect, is in China, which has a social assistance program which initially was restricted to people in urban areas, families in poverty in urban areas. That is about 24 million families, and it has now been extended to rural areas where approximately around another 56 million would join the program. So you're looking at 76 million or thereabouts. Next one is India, which in 2005 introduced a new national rural employment guarantee scheme, by which households in rural areas have an entitlement of 100 days employment on demand. So they kind of go to the local government office, and if they are unemployed, they can actually ask for work to be given to them at the kind of minimum wage rate. That is around 46 million households, and because there is a discussion with the recent election in India as to whether they're going to continue with that. South Africa has both a pension to older people who have low incomes, as well as a grant that is paid to children who are in families in poverty. And combined, those two programs reach around 1/2 of all households in South Africa. And then if you move to Latin America, and I'm going to focus mainly on Latin America, the largest program is the Bolsa Familia in Brazil, which provides a transfer to 14 million households in Brazil, around a quarter of the population. So they're very large scale. And of course, there are many more examples from other countries too. That is basically developed in the last 10 or 15 years. And it has spread everywhere. I forgot to mention Indonesia also, which is one of the largest programs in Asia. Now, let me give you some indication of the size of that the size of the programs in Latin America. The numbers that I have there are the number of families. The numbers, millions of population who are participating in human development conditional cash transfer programs. I'll explain those ones in a second. And as you can see, they increased from 46 million in 2002 to 135 million in 2012. That is around a quarter of the population in Latin America who have someone in the household who receives a transfer of this type. And then you can see the kind of poverty decline at the same time. The blue line is the decline in the poverty headcount rate, the proportion of the population who are poor. And as you can see, there has been a sustained decline from around 44% to around 26% in the same period. And if you look at food poverty, which in Latin America they call it indigence, then that is the red line. As you can see, there has been also a very significant decline in the number of households which the number of households that are in poverty. So the question is whether the two are related. I mean, have these programs contributed to the reduction in poverty that we observe in Latin America? Now, human development conditional cash transfer programs are a particular type of program which provides a transfer to households on a regular basis on condition that children are enrolled at school and attend school regularly, and also on conditions that the families that participate in the program make full use of primary health care. Many programs actually specify the number of visits that people in the household must have, particularly as you would expect for infants and expectant mothers. They have to go more regularly than, say, sort of people in the age of 25 to 35. So the transfers are conditional on families making use of both health and education. And I'll kind of go back to that point in a second, because that is important to the actual case study that I'm going to use. Now, if we wanted to evaluate these programs, therefore we want to know what is their impact on poverty. The question is, what is the impact of a policy intervention on a target group? But really what we mean is the sentence there. What is the impact of a policy intervention on the target group compared to a situation where the intervention is not there? That is really what we mean. It's implicit in the question, right? But that is, of course, very hard to implement, because once people participate in a program, you hope that the program will have transformative effects on those families. And therefore, it's really difficult to undo those ones later and say, well, forget about that. We're going to now kind of have a situation in which you have never been in this program again. So it's really kind of, as you can see, difficult to do that. So if we cannot undo individual participation, then we need to identify a counterfactual. And most of what I have to say is really about how we can address this particular issue of identifying a counterfactual, which is an appropriate counterfactual, and what information does it give us to compare the treatment group with the counterfactual. Now, in terms of poverty interventions, we have a particular difficulty here. We have two very strong difficulties. The first one is that, of course, families are assigned to the program, but are invited to participate in the program on the basis of their socioeconomic status, which is bound to be systematically different to families which are not in poverty, right? So we have to account for that. And of course, the assignment group might have other requirements. It might have requirements on the age of, for example, of the potential participants. It might have kind of requirement in terms of where they live in rural areas or urban areas, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of kind of selection bias. If we wanted to, say, compare a group of families that participate in an anti-poverty program with perhaps another group in the population. So therefore, we need to take on board two things: that the observed outcomes depend not just on program participation, but also depend on pre-program characteristics or propensities of the families involved. Now, if we wanted to ask someone that works on methods like you do, what would you do? Well, perhaps the answer is randomization. Okay, if you can randomly assign the population to the program or not, then you can very safely look at the impact of the program on particular outcomes for the population that participated. If you do a randomization, then the assignment of the program is not systematically related to the outcomes that you're expecting. We have a problem about this in poverty too. We have two particular problems. The first one is that, of course, it would be unethical to deny households that are in poverty of suffering from particular deprivation. It would be unethical to deny them, participation on the program on the basis that we're going to find out whether the programs work or not. So there are kind of ethical issues involved. And you find, for example, that Well, certainly, I'm sure that if I put an application to an evaluation of this type, the University of Manchester Ethical Committee will probably, ask me for a lot of detail on this, right? You find, for example, that a lot of evaluations are done by UN organizations or international organizations, and that is partly because many of them do not have an ethics committee, right, that checks on this. So there's an interesting issue there. The other issue which is important is that of politics, because of course these programs are very political, and therefore there is going to be a lot of competition among parliamentarians, for example, for the programs to be located in their districts, so that they can benefit from any kind of improvements in the population. So it's going to be hard, for example, in a government coalition to say, actually, we're not going to include your district because we are doing a kind of an evaluation. So it's hard to do that. So we can look for natural experiments. In particular, as you can see, we're going to look at situations in which implementation features of the program allows us to come up with a counterfactual that is reasonably reliable. And I'm going to use the term social experiments or quasi-experiments, where these kind of features of the implementation of the program are introduced intentionally with the purpose of supporting evaluation. Now, what kind of techniques can we use? What are the alternatives to randomization? Basically, there are four that we discuss in the kind of in the issue around supportive programs. The first one is, of course, to manufacture a counterfactual group. I mean, you can match participants in a program with perhaps other members of other groups in the population that have similar characteristics. There are several techniques like propensity score matching that allows you to look for groups that are reasonably similar in terms of their characteristics to the group that participates in the program. This is very problematic because you can only match on the basis of the characteristics that you observe, and typically, in kind of regressions analysis of this type, you have a large portion of the variance that is unexplained by the variables that you're using. So clearly there is an issue about unobservables and whether they will have a systematic kind of effect on the outcomes that you find. Another alternative, and that is all I'm going to say about propensity score matching. If you go back 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there were lots of papers published which focus on propensity score matching as a means of identifying kind of outcomes, but there are very few of those ones around anymore. So I'm going to focus on the other two. The other one is to, as I said before, trying to introduce a feature in the program that will allow you to have a control group and a treatment group, and then to look over time at the effect of the program on particular outcomes, as I have there on the kind of figure in the middle. So if, for example, you have a treatment group which has outcomes like described by the blue line, and a control group that gives you outcomes defined by the red line, then with a kind of difference in difference approach, you can actually subtract from B the kind of change that took place among the control group, and then you are able to identify an outcome A that you can then attribute to the program. And I got an example of that later on. The other possibility is to find some form of discontinuity, which has to do with the way the program is assigned. Typically, for example, if you have a pension for people who are 65 years of age, it's a kind of it's a public pension as opposed to a contributory pension, then you would expect that when you introduce the program, you will have an impact around that age. So if you look at the figure at the bottom, say the blue line is what would happen in the absence of a program, of a pension. The red line is what would happen, after receipt of the pension, and T is 65. So you can focus on that kind of discontinuity in the way that the program works to be able to identify the specific effects of the program, and the effect of the program there will be A. Right. Now, let me give you some information about perhaps the classic case study on this, so the kind of perhaps the canonical case study in terms of evaluating anti-poverty programs in recent times in developing countries. And that is to do with the program that was introduced in Mexico in 1997. It was called Progresa, which means improvements in health and education, roughly. It's a human development conditional income transfer program, provides transfer to families on the condition that families send their children to school and on the condition that the families make full use of health provision, primary health care. It was introduced gradually, first in the poorest communities, in the poorest states, in rural areas, and then it was extended to urban areas in 2002. Typically in Latin America, whenever you have a new president, the new president says, it's all going to be completely different now, so Progresa was renamed Oportunidades to coincide with the new president being elected in Mexico. It might be useful for us to have some idea of the kind of the way in which the program design was supposed to work. So you have the problem here, high incidence of persistent and extreme intergenerational poverty in rural areas of Mexico. By intergenerational persistent poverty, what we mean is that children leave school early, work informally, their children leave school early and work informally, and their children leave school early and work informally. So you have a kind of a persistence in poverty. And also at the time, 1997, there was a big push for agricultural liberalization, which would have meant even worse kind of effects on people in rural areas, particularly in terms of human capital deficits. So the policy instrument that the program devised was regular income transfers with kind of conditions based on household investment in their children, schooling, healthcare, and nutrition. The timing of the program was 5 years because they had a loan from, I think it was the World Bank initially to establish it, so it had a 5-year period time window. It was then made permanent. It was then renewed for another 5 years and made permanent. It's likely that there might be families in Mexico that have been consistently in the program since 1997, right? So it was kind of renewed in that way. And kind of the outcomes that we expect is low incidence of extreme poverty and kind of human capital accumulation. That is what they were expecting. And I got in red on a more kind of technical way of describing exactly how this is supposed to work. This will give you an idea of the package of the program. So you have on the left-hand side income transfers, and on the right-hand side you have kind of service utilization. In terms of income transfers, there is a nutrition subsidy that is paid to the household, which was $14 in 2003. And then, because the focus is on school, then the designers of the program try to organize the transfers to provide maximum incentives at certain points in the education cycle. Basically, there were two problems there. The first problem was the transition from primary school to secondary school. A lot of children did not move from primary to secondary school, right? So that was the first issue. And as you can see, going from 6th grade to 7th grade, going from 3rd grade to 6th grade, there is a big increase in the transfer. This is not, by the way, the age of children, but the grade in which they are. Because in Latin American countries, there is a lot of school repetition. So you can have someone much older than you would expect if people had moved every year from one grade to the next one. So that addressed the first issue, which is transition from primary to secondary school. The second issue is the transition, is the stay of girls in secondary school, right? And so that was addressed by having a much bigger incentive for girls than for boys, as you can see from there. And then the designers were really concerned about natalism, about whether the population would increase as a consequence of the program. So they put an overall cap. So no family could get more than $72, regardless of the number of children they had. Okay? And on the right-hand side, you have the kind of service utilization package. Primary health care, as I said, it was required that adults went once a year. That increased utilization of primary health care, it doubled it from an average of 1/2 or visits per head per year, to 1 visit per head per year. And then, of course, you have other checks, and you have nutrition supplements, and so on and so forth. Right? The assignment rule, the way in which the program selected the participants worked in 3 stages. First, they identify the poorest states. Secondly, they identify the poorest localities within states. And finally, they they did a survey to identify the socioeconomic conditions of each household, and that generated a welfare score for each household. So you can actually rank them from the poorest to the less poor. Right? The important thing is that the assignment was based on a survey done in 1997, which preceded the implementation of the program in 1998. And this is crucial for the impact evaluation that we're going to discuss later on. At the time, of course, as you would expect, giving money to people who are in poverty is actually not a very popular political idea. As you can see from the press, if you read or listen to the radio in this country, you will find the same, right? There is a resistance, a reluctance to actually provide families in poverty with money so that they can improve their situation. So to address that issue, the designers of the program introduced a really well thought through evaluation, and we're benefiting from that thinking there. So they organized an evaluation sample of around 24,000 households in 506 localities in 7 states, and they took an evaluation survey every 6 months from 1998 to 2000. So we have 6 months tracking of all these households. Now, what is important for our purposes is what you have there. Basically, that is the evaluation sample. As you can see, there are households that are eligible and households that are non-eligible. The households that are eligible is because they have lower welfare scores. The non-eligible households are the households that have better scores. And then what they did was to treat 320 localities first in 1998, and then the other 186 came into the program in 2000. Right? And now this is ideal for the difference in difference approach, because you have done the assignment before the program starts, and then the eligible families in the treated localities and control localities are exactly the same. Well, not exactly the same, but they are roughly the same. And then you can compare what happens afterwards. I'll come back to that box in a second. Right. Let me give you some insights into the outcomes. The first question is, did Progressa reduce poverty? And I have 3 measures of poverty here that we use in sort of poverty research. The first one is the headcount rate, that is the proportion of the population who are below 1/2 of the per capita household consumption. That is the poverty line, right? And then the second one is the poverty gap. The poverty headcount is not very good because it just fixes on that level. Families can be up, above or below it, but of course it matters how poor people are. If people are really poor, then it matters. Say that you have a poverty line of $10. Someone living on $1 a day has a very different livelihood than someone living on $9 a day, although both of them would be considered to be poor by the poverty headcount rate. So the poverty gap measures the deficit in consumption for the families and adds it all up for the people in poverty, and then divides it by the population to be able to account for changes in demographics over time. And then even that is not as precise in terms of putting a spotlight on families that are really poor. So if you actually weight the poverty gap by the poverty gap itself, that gives a much bigger weight to families that are furthest away from the poverty line, that are poorest. So the poverty gap square magnifies, as it were, any changes that might happen on the poorest families. And you have there what basically happened. So you had for the control group, remember those are the people who are eligible for the program in localities that were treated, that were left for 2000. That is a control group. The poverty headcount rate increased from 65% to 69%. Whereas for the families that were in the eligible families in the treated localities, it declined from 67% to 59%. That gives you a kind of overall difference of 11.7 percentage points that amounts to a reduction in poverty of 17%. Now, the important thing, of course, is the impact it has on the poorest, which you can see from the P2. And from the P2, you can see that it actually reduced the poverty gap square by nearly 50%. So basically, the program is much more focused on the poorest families. And by using the P2 as opposed to the P0, you get a sense of, what is the impact on the program on the poorest. Now, that is really good for us kind of poverty researchers, but if you don't want work in poverty, you perhaps want something a bit more kind of straightforward that will tell you the impact of the program, particularly on children. And that is this is a really good a result from a study that was done that basically looked at the height for age of all children. I think it's between the ages of 2 and 6, right? And of course, the first bar there is the comparison between children who were eligible for the program in treatment localities as opposed to children that were eligible for the program in untreated localities. And the height for age is a really wonderful indicator because it tells you about long-term nutrition. So we're not just talking about reducing poverty today in terms of consumption, but we're looking at a very significant impact on the nutrition and therefore the long-term productivity of these children. The kind of headline is that after 2 years, children in the treated, eligible children in the treated localities increase their height for age by as much as 1 centimeter. 1 centimeter is a really huge number. It's a really significant number. And even when, because remember the children in the control localities joined the program in 2000, even 6 years after, there was still a gap between the two, which was hopefully diminishing, hopefully to 0. And that is a really kind of, I think that is much more informative perhaps than the poverty table that I had before. Okay, I got another 5 minutes. So now I'm going to try to tell you a bit about the work that we do. We academics were always, we don't lose a chance to show off in terms of the work that we do. So I'm going to take the last 5 minutes to tell you a bit about the work that we did. Well, the first thing we did was, if you go back to the evaluation sample that you have there, the focus so far is being on the families that were treated. But the question arises, if you make a really big injection of cash into rural localities, it's bound to have an impact on the rest of the population. It's bound to have an impact on the local economy. So, of course, the families that receive the transfers perhaps are going to go and buy eggs from their neighbor. They're going to go and get chicken from another neighbor there, and that kind of generates economic activity. They might even kind of say, okay, I got this transfer, I'm going to share it with my family, and then kind of the transfer gets diffused within the local economy. And we felt that you could actually get a sense of that by comparing the Group C, the non-eligible Group C that were incorporated in the program in '98, with Group D. You shouldn't have any effect of the program on people who did not participate in the program, that were not eligible to be in the program. So we looked at that. Indirect treatment effect, which I kind of specify there, basically compares, as I said, the non-eligible households. The expectation is to find 0, unless there is a local economy effect. And if you compare them, and I'm sort of giving you there the kind of the coefficient on that particular variable, on the cross-section, you'll find that in October '98 there is no difference between, as I said, the non-eligibles in the treated and untreated localities. But then you have a really big increase in non-eligibles in 1999 of around 12% improvement in their consumption. So there must have been some kind of local economic effect. As you would expect, the effect peters out later because the control villages, localities, actually joined the program in 2000. So you would expect that that kind of effect will disappear because now all localities are receiving this program. So that is interesting. Of course, it raises a lot of questions. How does it work? And this is one of the areas where, of course, this type of impact evaluations don't tell us very much because they tell us there was a change, but we don't know why. I mean, could it be, for example, let me imagine two possible scenarios. The first one that I've given you, basically the family who received the transfer goes and spends it in the local economy and therefore provides incentives for other farmers to produce more. But it could also be that there is one dominant elite in the village that says, I'm sorry, you're going to have to share the money with me, right? One is a kind of positive effect, the other one is a negative effect. We just don't know, right? Like, which is one of the issues with the kind of impact evaluations we do. You need a lot more sort of qualitative work to identify the actual mechanism through which this kind of change is taking place. And perhaps this is a blunt instrument in that context. The other example that I wanted to tell you about is some work we did using regression discontinuity design. This is for a program in Colombia. It's very similar to the one in Mexico, so I'm not going to spend time telling you how it works. It's the same principle. You have transfers. The transfers are conditional on children being at school, on making use of sort of healthcare, and we were able to access the way in which all public policies, social policies in Colombia work is that if you reckon that you have an entitlement to it, you have to do a survey, a very short one-page survey. On the basis of that survey, then the agency gives you a welfare score. And on the basis of that welfare score, then you are able to access kind of different types of programs, right? So we were able to access those kind of welfare scores, which is fantastic because the population of Colombia is around 50 million, over 50 million. And around 60% of the population have done this survey. So we're looking at 30 million, right? It's the first time in my life that I work with a sample that size. And it's going to be crucial as I'm going to explain. So in 2007, the program was extended to large cities, so we focused on those ones. They had the one in the program before then. And we used the 2006 welfare scores, but we looked at the outcomes in 2010, 4 years later, right? These are actually the welfare scores, which are called CISBEN scores. The threshold point is 11 for families in urban areas. So if you have less than 11 points, you're in the program. If you have more than 11 points, you're out of the program. And actually it works because you can see that this is the proportion of the population register for each of the CISBEN scores. And so you can see there is a discontinuity at the 11 points. So we thought that we could actually look at that discontinuity and use it to see whether there was any very significant change at that point. And as you can see, we were focused on labor force participation. So we're looking at labor force participation based on welfare in 2010, based on welfare scores in 2006. We find that for males, there is an increase in labor force participation of 2.3%. This is really important because much of the kind of reluctance to introduce anti-poverty policies is, as you can see in the press, is because these guys are just going to go and sit at home and not going to work. In fact, there was an increase in labor force participation about males of around 2.3%. And the most interesting kind of result that we found was that at the threshold, at the discontinuity, basically families with single mothers and children aged 0 to 6, there was an increase in labor force participation of 6%. And that made a lot of sense because the transfer actually not only stabilizes their income, but enables them to use childcare. So that is the kind of interpretation that we gave it. And this is my final thing to say. We're also interested in the political economy of this, right? Because okay, we can We can think about different methods. We can look at their properties, and we can look at what information they will give us, and that is kind of the assessment that we're doing. But there is a question that comes before that. Why is it that some countries, why is it that some programs are evaluated, and why is it that some other programs are not, right? What actually drives the kind of the evaluation of these programs? We had a number of, we collected a database of programs in developing countries, and we did some kind of multivariate regression analysis that was dodgy, I would say. But I mean, we tried to kind of identify some kind of specific effects. And I think the main conclusions we came were these ones. Actually, you have stronger impact evaluations in conditions where there is much greater resistance to the program. So the greater the resistance to the program, the more likely it is that there will be an impact evaluation. So impact evaluations are not just things that we decide as researchers, but they actually have a political background, right? So where you have a lot of perhaps resistance to your idea, then you can actually do an impact evaluation to demonstrate that it does work. If you compare, for example, Mexico, that has had, as you can see, a very strong impact evaluation, with Brazil, which had none. The reason why Brazil had no impact evaluations on the largest program in Latin America until recently is perhaps that there the programs grew organically, they were perceived to be a right, and so there was much less political resistance to it. So that is one factor that is really important. Why is it that there is a lot more impact evaluations of anti-poverty programs in Brazil and Africa? Is a lot to do with the kind of reluctance and resistance to it. And the other thing that we found, and this is not perhaps surprising, is that, of course, where you got more capacity to do this kind of work, it's more likely to happen. So whenever you got donors, then you're more likely to have an impact evaluation, because they're interested to find out about the impact of particular programs. I mean, in our case, in Department for International Development, you can see MPs sort of in the House of Commons saying, what is the effect of the aid that we give? And so there is much greater kind of pressure to do this kind of work. Right, so that is all I have. Any questions, comments? Yeah. Yeah.
So could you just tell us if it is like the difference between A minus B, the treatment or the control group, or is it between the eligible and the non-eligible households?
No, in this case, they are just the difference between eligible households in the treatment localities, villages, and the control villages.
So it's A minus B?
Yes.
Okay. And you had also measured height for age.
Yeah.
Why not weight for age?
There was also measured in this study. The study that was done also included other measures. There was also a measure of weight for age. The weight for age gives you an indication of short-term nutrition improvements, right? But the height for age is the important one, because it gives you an indication of long-term nutrition improvements. If you do, as kind of labor economists like myself do, if you do a regression analysis, putting the kind of earnings on the left-hand side, and you have a range of variables on the right-hand side that explain the productivity of different people, and if you put height there, it gives you a very significant coefficient, right? Taller people have high wages, and it's actually very significant. For all countries that I know of, all the studies that I know of, that is the situation, right? So if you manage to have a 1 centimeter gain on others, you're bound to have much higher earnings in the labor market. The other reason why this is really important is this, because then you can use other surveys and other techniques to actually simulate what is the impact on the improvement of nutrition, or the height on the population that are treated over the whole of their education cycle. Let's suppose that, let's fix on this 1% at the moment, for example. You take a household survey for Mexico, you put height on, if you have that variable on the right-hand side, it's going to give you a coefficient. You can then translate this 1% gain in height for age into the overall productivity that will go to the economy from the program itself. And therefore, you can also make an assessment as to whether the program is cost effective, right? So this is really important from that point of view. There are kind of two variables that have been used to look at cost effectiveness by kind of simulating the impact on the macro impact on the economy of the anti-poverty programs. This is one, and the other one is the years of education. All the studies on Mexico point to the fact that as a consequence of the program, the participants in the program for the full education cycle will come out of school with around 1 additional year of schooling, right? And then again, you use the kind of labor force survey data. You can actually do a calculation of what is the contribution to earnings of having additional years of schooling. And then you can put a figure on that. You can then translate it in terms of GDP, and then you can see whether the program is cost effective and whether it pays for itself to have kind of anti-poverty programs. And I would suggest that the programs are well designed, are effective. They will pay for themselves. So that is why this is more, perhaps better than the wait for age, right?
You speak of transfer. Transfers are generated by who?
By the government. I mean, in this case, that is what I mean. Basically, each family that is considered to be entitled to the program can receive, on a monthly basis, these amounts from the government.
Of Mexico.
Of Mexico, yes. I mean, they are kind of established in European countries. We call this social assistance, right? And it goes back kind of centuries back. I think the UK was the first country that introduced some form of social assistance in the 18th century, which is referred to as the poor laws. And so these kind of transfers, the idea behind the transfer, as I had in my kind of box there, is that if families can have regular transfers, they can rely, I mean, they don't cover their full needs. It's usually roughly around 20% of household consumption, right? That is roughly what the transfer is, about 20% of household consumption. You cannot live off it, but it somehow stabilizes your consumption. So you need to worry about where the money is going to come from next week. At least there is going to be a floor to it. That, together with the conditions, enable then families to say, okay, I'm going to send my children to school partly because of the program, partly because of the income that is associated with the transfer, right? So that is the kind of idea behind them. They are very common in Latin America, but increasingly in other parts of the world. Programs of this type have also been implemented with much less success and in very small scale in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya, for example. So that would be the kind of the justification for them, or that is how we expect that these programs work. But if you look at it, on a global basis, our kind of calculations is that between 3/4 and 1 billion people in developing countries live with someone in the household that receive one form of transfer of this type. So it's a really large number. Yeah.
Don't take it as it's a went on to permanent program that there's no cut-off that we don't ever get. Are they cut off when they're 18? Is the child classed as so that they can stop receiving them then?
Right, yes, of course, the cut-off is when children leave school. In the case of this particular program, your youngest child leaves school. That would be the cutoff. At that point, it stops. Recently, the government of Mexico introduced scholarships for the 18 to 20 category to be able to kind of try to provide a bridge towards a vocational and post-school education. So you can do that. There are other programs that have the Familia Selección in Colombia is not just the age of the children that is one requirement, but also the welfare score, which is kind of checked or updated every 4 years, so that you have to be on these kind of welfare scores there to. Perhaps I'll say something about that, because it's interesting too, the way these welfare scores are kind of allocated to families. And as I say, the family is filling one size of A4 with information about their housing, about their income, about age, and so on. On the basis of that, that goes into a statistical model that is based on sort of household data for the whole country. So you have kind of, you know, which families are poor in the sample and their characteristics. So on the basis of that, you then allocate the scores to these individual families. For the purpose of us doing this work, of course, it's crucial that the statistical model for calculating the score is secret. And it is, in fact. I mean, the government does not release that because then you would be able to manipulate your characteristics to actually fit into the program. In fact, the government of Colombia used to, in the early 90s, to have to kind of to make public the calculation, and of course there was a lot of manipulation. You would have a lot of people punch just before the kind of the threshold score, but now it's secret, so that you can actually do your own estimation. We had a go at doing our own estimation of it roughly, but we don't. No one knows what it is.
Just another quick question: has anybody looked at? Jeff mentioned it whether the birth rate actually increased in these families. You know, it's difficult to say how many children you've had anyway, but did the birth rate overall increase in that group that received the informal?
Yes, and yes, there are.
To better state, did it actually encourage them to have more children?
I don't think. No, it actually didn't encourage. An increase in the population at all. I mean, it somehow it comes out of the design of the program, because if the transfer is 20% of household consumption, then it's unlikely to be a big investment. You know, in the sense that you're going to have additional children simply because of this particular transfer. You're still 80% out on each child, and of course children are a lot more expensive than we usually estimate. So no, they haven't had any impact on birth rates.
Were there any changes to? I'm thinking you mentioned about, say, multiplier effects like other effects in the economy. What about things, say, for example, that can also heavily impact on some of the outcomes, such as educational attainment, like household choice, like the ability to access certain types of housing? Did that change at all? Were these groups able to modify or change what sort of conditions in terms of housing they were in?
That's an area that is really being researched at the moment, and you don't have very clear results coming out. For example, we don't know very much about. We know that children were at school because children that were in the program were kind of, as it were registered at school, and the teacher had to then provide the information to the program agency. But there is the program doesn't have any conditions on the actual on the demand side, on the attainment or in school attainment, and it doesn't have any conditions on school supply. So it's a limited kind of range of variables that you can influence, because that depends on lots of other things in a sense, right? I mean, it would be interesting to see whether it has led to any improvement in the quality of education, because you can turn up at school and not get very good education, and if it had any impact on attainment, and we don't know very much about that. There are some papers that seem to show marginal improvements, others that do not. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's it. Many thanks.